Hello and welcome to Fortra's Cybersecurity Predictions for 2025. My name is Bob Erdman and I will be your moderator today. We have a great panel and they will be taking different items from our predictions and we're going to have lots of lively conversations. So let's kick it off and do some introductions. Chris Refkin, would you like to start?
Thanks, Bob. My name is Chris Refkin. I'm the Chief Security and Risk Officer here at Fortra. So I have the pleasure of overseeing our product security, our SaaS infrastructure security, corporate infrastructure security, as well as overall business risk management activities here at Fortra.
Thanks, Chris. Theo?
Hi, everyone. Theo Zafirakos here as cybersecurity and information security expert. I've been in the cybersecurity field for over 25 years and now focusing with Terranova Security on cybersecurity awareness and training for employees.
And finally, John.
Absolutely. So I am Senior Fellow Threat Research at Fortra. I work with our offensive security teams. I head up the research and development for our Cobalt Strike red teaming product. I also do some work on the defensive side, both with our active defense work that we do, basically scamming the scammers for Agari. And then lastly, also on the defensive side, I head up the content and research teams for our MDR product.
Thank you, everyone. So we are going to go over our cybersecurity predictions for 2025. So let's not waste any time and get started. And the first thing we have on our list is targeting vulnerabilities in information supply chains. What are we seeing with vendor risk, operational resilience, and what used to be novel attacks sometimes aren't really so novel anymore? This sounds like a great one for you, Chris, if you'd like to kick us off on your thoughts.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Bob. I think the first one on prioritizing vendor risk is that a lot of things that used to be done in spreadsheets are now done in somebody else's tool. And so now you have this ever-expanding ecosystem of products that are easily consumable SaaS products, whether they're integrated to your organization's security stack or not, have information related to your company, potentially your customers as well. And you see this kind of continuing sprawl here, and it's how do you prioritize? Because any company is going to have hundreds, if not in the low thousands of vendors out there. How do you really focus on those vendors? And then ultimately, from a maturity standpoint, if you do have a negative risk assessment or a vendor assessment, what do you do next? Are you actually going to accept it, or are you going to be able to pivot away from that particular vendor and have a backup plan for especially core or critical services that you might have? And what would be your risk tolerance for that? I feel like today a lot of vendor risk is check the box. Hey, we get this report, or we get this SBOM, or we get this SIG questionnaire completed. We're going to ask our vendor to complete some responses, but other than that, it doesn't really inform our risk posture or decision making or anything like that. So how are we going to be able to take that and actually turn into something materially helpful to impact your roadmaps and be proactive about a potential risk situation that you're monitoring in your vendor supply chain, if you will. And with that, before I hand it over to John here, is from a resilience standpoint and from a novel attack standpoint. I mean, we can even see here that there's some attacks that we're seeing just using the phishing landscape that couldn't really have cooked up a couple of years ago, but now it's like we're seeing them every month, and it's just becoming more and more common to have, I would say, attacks that are pushing the envelope to be more common today. John, do you have anything you'd like to weigh in here?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris, as I look at, the future, we have to look at the past first. And so we go back to 2013, the Target breach. They didn't breach Target, they breached one of their suppliers. It turned out to be the heating and air conditioning supplier, but because of the way they configure their networks, getting in there was enough to get in. We look at Slim CD. It's a payment gateway, and in 2023, 2024, bad actors had access to that particular payment processor. So instead of going and hacking 1,000 different websites that use that payment processor, they hack the payment processor. So as we look to the future, I see scenarios where little bits of software that are used by thousands of companies will intentionally be hacked and will have some bad code inserted so that they can just effectively, have the equivalent of a backdoor in 1,000 different products just by updating one little Python library or, one little Ruby library that all of these folks are using.
And it might not even be that it's a small piece of code. It could be that small company that's behind the small piece of code that you've never heard of, but is so critical, is such a cog in the wheel that everybody overlooks them, nobody ever thinks about it. And that's really the interesting piece. Because I mean, a couple of years ago, probably it's over 5 years at this point, in the Pacific Northwest, I know that there was attacks on like fourth or fifth tier suppliers to the power grid in the Pacific Northwest, and using that as a foothold in an attempt to get ultimately up the food chain to target power transmission and power generation stations. So the smaller companies out there probably going to see more and more focus from a cybersecurity attack standpoint as well.
We're talking supply chains. We're starting to talk more and more about software bill of materials or SBOMs. Theo, you hearing anything from like our customers? Are they requesting these more often? Is anybody actually using them when they get sent out?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And a lot of times we see that the cyber resilience becomes an afterthought initially, instead of initially thinking about it and considering it before you engage with a supplier. Organizations are starting to engage with us a lot more from the beginning now than they did in the past, to understand what is being done, the inventory, especially if we're using open source code and software, making sure that it's resilient and we're mitigating any attacks. Right, and they're asking those questions, right? What is the business impact if your system gets compromised, or if the data gets compromised? Clients are starting to ask these questions early on in the engagement process, not after they engage with us. So they want to have this information ahead of time, and doing comprehensive security assessments from the start, right? It doesn't stop also with us. They're also looking at our suppliers. Who are our suppliers? Who are our third parties that are critical to the services that we offer our clients? So extending the cybersecurity resilience beyond just the first party that you interact with.
Excellent points. So let's move on to prediction number 2. And I think we will kick this one off with John to talk to us about increased scrutiny on service providers before and after we adopt their technology.
Yeah, so as I look at, a typical sales cycle, as a salesperson, one of the steps almost always is go fill out this SIG or a SIG light. And, we're going to look at your security at that point in time. And then, of course, a year later, you come up for renewal and they want you to refill out this thing. This cannot be a simple, checkbox item that you do once a year, because you can be absolutely perfectly clean, everything's great, nothing wrong with your systems, and you fill out the form, and then 3 weeks later somebody makes a slight update to some of the software and suddenly has introduced a new vulnerability, or suddenly one of the things that you said on your SIG is no longer true because it's changed. And so I think the what we need to do is move to a more continuous, ongoing assessment of that. Does your company do phishing simulation training? If you're going to be our vendor, we require that you do this. Do you do DMARC? Do you do SPF, DKIM, things of that nature? Well, the answer might be yes today, and then something happens where we had to turn that off. It was causing deliverability problems, so we turned off our DMARC stuff. Well, if you may not find that out until the next time you do that questionnaire. Be really nice to know, right away that some change has happened.
Theo, what are you hearing from your side of Fortra?
Yeah, and as we see more and more organizations rely on service providers, cloud service technology, the assessment becomes crucial for those organizations. And as John said, not just assessment, but ongoing monitoring and logging, right? Especially if that third party is treating critical data, has access to critical systems, and making sure that everything follows the organization's policies and standards when it comes to security of those controls. So from the very beginning, organizations are asking specific and enforceable controls in the contracts. So you have to do this, you have to do this. provide us evidence that you're doing this. And this becomes a challenge because a lot of times security controls are sensitive. Our security organizations do not want to share that outside of the perimeter because it risks exposure, not only to the parent organization, but also the other clients, right? So how do we meet that balance of showing our clients that we have security in place, but at the same time maintaining the security of the controls and the processes that we have in place? Another component that becomes very important when it comes to third parties is making sure that you have robust incident response and reporting process. How quickly do you have to report an incident? How quickly do you have to report an incident that is critical or touches sensitive or personal information? Because as we have clients in various jurisdictions, privacy laws and regulations have different reporting requirements, and they tend to be very strict.
Chris, you're probably most in the trenches in our group here with this slide. Can you give any tips around how we are approaching and how other people can approach the regulatory compliance piece of this and how we loop that in with what we do to check out our vendors?
Well, a couple different thoughts here. One, arm your lawyers with as much information as possible. And not from a negative standpoint, but the more that the lawyers are comfortable, can understand what's being asked of them and what they need to ask, will help that pre-adoption, pre-entry negotiation from your MSA or contracts, what do you have? It'll make that process smoother, because what we see from the legal standpoint when it comes to contract negotiation is everybody's rushing towards the compliance side of the house, and this was kind of an expected uptick from 6 to 9 months ago. However, as I learned the lesson at a conference I spoke at many years ago, compliance folks don't like to hear that compliance doesn't equal security, and trying to help the lawyers understand, like, okay, well, here's the risk, here's what we really need. I don't care if they have the certification, but if they can meet these 10 requirements, that's a lot easier to negotiate on, is like 10 hard facts versus some nebulous, comply with, industry leading standards, e.g., and list off the top 10 certifications or compliance frameworks out there. It's a lot easier to push through those types of negotiations again than something a little bit more big and vague. From a continuous monitoring standpoint, what we're seeing from our customer base and from a little bit from what we do as well is really trying to focus on truly that core critical vendor set. Really look at the ones you depend upon the most. There's some customers that we have where we provide numerous solutions to, understands the amount of scrutiny we would get. That makes perfect sense. For us on the flip side, when we're looking at our vendor population, we're really focusing down on those key core vendors that are truly global in nature for us, so that we can really prioritize our efforts, because until we get to treating vendor risk similar to an on-premise data center or your cloud ecosystem, you're going to have to focus on priority. But I really do see that as the next evolution when it comes to that supply chain vendor risk management, is really treating your supply chain vendor risk area as its own data center almost. And I'm saying data center loosely, but really more that concept of, you have teams that are focused on infrastructure protection, you have teams focused on cloud protection. Probably need to build out a proper team focused just on vendor supply chain, not just either inbound from your customers or outbound from you all, but also the dependencies down those chains. It gets complex really, really fast. I was driving around this weekend, and I happened to see one of our customers' names on some products they make out in the real world, and just got me starting thinking about how embedded our customers are with the world, and then how much we're pulled along with that. And it really is an interesting thought exercise. And I'd never thought that our company would be affiliated with some of the things that I was seeing out there, but it happens that we are. We're helping to protect our customers. They're building some interesting things out in the world. And again, unless you have that concentrated team that's focused on that, that's, again, not to check the box that we've been all knocking a few providers of questionnaires out there. But if you really have a team focused on that, again, how are you using that to move the needle? And some conversations I've been involved in with our customers can be super, super positive, super fruitful if you can have a meeting of the minds, if you get away from that kind of check the box mentality.
Chris, it's funny. When I used to be on the sales side at Agari, we occasionally would have a customer say, "Hey, can we pen test your environment?" And we'd be kind of like, okay, it's kind of a weird request, but sure, go ahead. I think we're going to see more and more of that as you see that extended supply chain. I think folks are going to say like, yeah, we're going to treat that kind of like an extension of our own, IT infrastructure. Let us go and run a pen test. I don't think we'll quite be to the team of let us red team your system yet, but certainly a very basic vuln scan or something I would not see as being that unusual moving forward.
Yeah, I'd agree. I wouldn't be shocked by that. Now, the balance of it is the number that we would get, let alone other companies get, and that workload is quite substantial just for us, let alone for other companies out there. And it'll be interesting to see how much and how far companies are going to try to push in 2025.
Well, moving on to prediction 3, let's talk about the evolving impacts of AI and how that is affecting our current and future threat landscape. Theo, I think this would be a great one for you to kick off and steer the boat.
Yes, voice and video cloning, fake videos, images, voices are going to be used to spread false information, misinformation, conduct social engineering attacks. And that's because people are more susceptible to respond to an audio or a video compared to a text message or an email. Because when we use voice and videos, although they're fake, we can impersonate someone's voice, what we wanted to say, the message to deliver, but even impersonate the tone, like, is the person excited, scared, and so on. And human reaction tends to be a 95% intuition, so we trust what we see and hear with our own eyes, and 5% analyzing what we see and hear. So these deep fakes are going to make us act much, much quicker than we have in the past with the social engineering attacks. The delivery mechanisms are going to remain the same. It's going to be social media, it's going to be email, text, phone calls, and so on. But the message itself, it's going to be crafted to deliver false information. This information also could pose a significant threat to a democracy because fake videos, speeches of politicians could be used to manipulate popular belief and damaging public figures and manipulating elections. So, and there's tools out there where the cyber criminals are using them to provide cybercrime as a service. Any cyber criminal could go and leverage those AI LLMs to create their own attack based on the context and the story they want to say and target users. There's going to be also fraud schemes for identity theft, impersonating high-stake individuals to steal money or commit financial fraud.
Thanks, Theo. And John, I know that one of the things that we have seen as AI has taken off and GPT systems taken off is the quality of communications from these malicious actors has really increased. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, sure. So, it used to be when we would see business email compromise attempts, they were almost universally in English because that is the language that is spoken in Nigeria, which is kind of like the heart of, if you will, business email compromise. But you would sense, there were just weird turns of phrases in the messages that you'd kind of look at it and, kindly forward me your cell phone number. Well, there still are the, scammers out there who will use kind of the clumsy English. However, we've seen in the last year or so, fewer of those, and we're seeing a lot more where it comes across much more naturally. But even bigger is the fact that we're not seeing it just in English, we're seeing it in a huge variety of languages. And it's not just simply, copy paste into Google Translate and then, take what you get out and send it. The, modern AIs, when they translate, can actually make it sound a lot, it'll flow a lot better. And so it's not as easy to realize that it was machine translated. The other thing that I see is this concept of, a multi-faceted attack where perhaps you get a deep fake voicemail that claims to be your CEO saying, hey, I'm going to send you an email in a bit. I need you to have a look at it. And by the way, it's really important that you keep it private. Now you're keyed up expecting that message. And when the message arrives, you're not going to think to do all those things like, oh, check the email address, check some of the headers, do these other checks that you're going to do. You're like, oh, no, I was expecting that email. And somebody could say, hey, this is the IT department. We need to do a crucial update. We're going to be sending you an email later with a link. You need to download that file and install it. Suddenly you're going to forget about that training you have that says don't click on the link in an email and install software. So I think those are the risks we're going to see moving forward.
Sounds like some of my very first social engineering employees I did when I was a young IT security consultant, John. Being up the phone and calling people. And I think something to really call out, kind of touch upon what you mentioned and what Theo mentioned, is that it's not just quote unquote employees or users. You're talking about everybody as a consumer of technology, whether as an employee of a company or as a private citizen in whatever country you happen to reside in. And with all of the open source information out there that's searchable related to, breaches from around the world. I mean, heck, pretty much all of America's had all their data lost at one point in time, especially due to some of the larger breaches over the last 5 years or so. And you take all of that information along with other open source information like LinkedIn and whatever else you can find out there, kids' soccer schedules that have your contact information in there, and you put it all together. How do you apply the same type of training and awareness you have at work at home? And I think that's where the gray area really is going to be with AI, because at work, we remind everybody, hey, just like you said, not just double check the sender and everything's going on. Hey, if something's suspicious, check out of band. You get an email, message them on Teams. You get a Teams check, give them a call on their cell phone that's published internally. Do some of those out of band checks. How do you do that on the home side? And that home side could actually be a beachhead for the work side. But how you address that and how you get after that, I think that's going to be the broader challenge here from a security industry standpoint.
And from individuals,
sorry, go ahead, Theo.
Yeah, and from an individual perspective, also this could also generate general skepticism about legitimate content, even if it's real. Now, how do I trust it that it is real, considering how easily it could be manipulated and be fake? So adopting legitimate messages could see resistance, right? Because people may not trust digital media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you are the help desk for your extended friends and family, this is what I think we're going to be getting a lot of calls about, and a lot of things that we need to really help school people up on. The constant flood of congratulations, you have won, or your package couldn't be delivered, you need to call me so I can send it to you before it gets returned, etc. Messages that we are all getting on a hourly basis just about these days is really getting crazy.
I remember a couple, heck, it might have been 5 or 10 years ago at this point, maybe closer to 10, getting an email to my personal account saying that something about like an Amazon account, an issue with your account or something couldn't be delivered. I'm like, I didn't order anything, and just started thinking about it. I'm like, holy cow! I'm sure a span of 10,000 messages like this went out, and somebody clicked a link, and it costs a nickel to send that. That's all it takes, right? Something that's plausible for that general population. What Netflix has been a very popular one of late as well. So you just you cross those boundaries, those gray areas a little bit, and people will start forgetting what they learned at work and clicking on things at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with all of the problems with deliveries and porch bandits and people breaking into lockers and such. I mean, when you get those calls of USPS tried, UPS tried, FedEx tried, named your sender, a lot of people are going to jump on those right away because they're probably getting a lot of packages. Ever since COVID, we've all increased the number of boxes arriving at our doors, and it just flows right in.
Yeah.
Well, moving on, we want to talk about how technology targeting has shifted, and it's not so much what they're attacking now as who they're attacking. And we talked a little bit about it in the last prediction. The amount of breach data that's been lost and put out in the wild is helping to compromise all of us. John, how about you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, so I'll start off with what we've seen and then where I think we're headed. So starting in September this year, I saw a campaign that was very similar to other campaigns I've seen with one very key difference. So the campaign basically works like this. You receive an email, it says, "Hey, I've hacked your computer. I notice you like to watch a lot of questionable adult material. I've accessed your camera. I've got all your contacts. And, unless you send me $1,000 in Bitcoin to this Bitcoin wallet, all your friends and family are going to get this information." It's scary, obviously. I've had a few friends call me saying, "Hey, I got this email. What do I do? I don't know how to get Bitcoin." I'm like, "Dude, relax. It's completely fake." The big change that we saw in September was now they say it'd be a real shame if I showed up at your doorstep at XYZ Main Street in such and such a town, and then included a Google Street View picture of the person's house. Well, this is obviously just combining all that breach data, but making a far more personalized lure. I have to think that the response rate of those probably is much higher because the person now has that sort of feeling like, gee, they actually know who I am. Well, I see that going to the nth degree, and just getting far worse in the future. Imagine they get a hold of your medical records, and maybe you had a test for something, maybe you got tested for a venereal disease. Whether it came out positive or negative, that's kind of embarrassing. Or there could be some other sort of medical situation that you really wouldn't want your friends and family to know about. So now you get an email. It doesn't just say like, "Hey, we're going to tell people, we're going to send people videos of this." We're going to say like, "Hey, we know that you had this test on this date with this doctor. I bet you really wouldn't like it if we let your wife so-and-so know, or your preacher, your minister, your coworker," and then call those people out by name. And no longer just say, "Hey, we want you to send us some money," but, "Hey, we want the source code to this one module of your product," or we want we want to know we want the org chart, if you will, for your finance or your HR teams. So now leveraging the detailed information they have about you to extort you into providing really, what basically turning you into a willing insider. Well, and I guess an unwilling insider, but an insider threat nonetheless.
We all want to protect everybody. Chris, do you do things differently for some of your, I'll just call them high risk personnel that you're in the org you're responsible for?
So we do. So we have our insider threat program, and then we also have, say, if you want to call it a high value target, executive security program, that type of thing, where we have additional monitoring, additional scrutiny, if you will. And honestly, it's kind of comes down to asset management almost. And I'm not calling people assets, but it's kind of the same idea of, all right, hey, does this server have any information on it, or is it just kind of dumb server serving up a particular process? Are these accounts, high value or not? Can we target them so that if we do get an alert, it automatically gets flagged at a higher level to our SOC team? And so there's ways like that we are working to embed, quote unquote, doing things differently for people that might be in a little bit more of an exposed position.
And Theo, what are you hearing about these different types of attacks these days coming from the field?
Yeah, there's I would say three areas of focus that we see evolution. First one is the continuous growth of attacks targeting the remote worker as organizations continue to be in a work from home or a hybrid workforce, especially spoofing popular third-party service providers and cloud solutions that organizations are leveraging, right? So those type of attacks will continue to grow. In terms of ransomware, an increase in double extortion ransomware, where they first encrypt your data, asking you for a ransom, and then they follow up with a second ransom where they will disclose your data if you don't pay the second ransom. So where sensitive information has been stolen, exfiltrated from your network. So those type of attacks requiring double payment. And the third area where we see an increase of attacks where our customers are requesting more user awareness is around attacks that attempt to bypass network controls, like QR code enabled phishing attacks, where they leverage on having the user take out their phone and scanning a QR code and not visiting a link through their company computer who is on the company network, protected by the company perimeter, security perimeter. When you go through your phone, the number of controls are much reduced. Or attacks targeting the multi-factor authentication system, right? The users know what to do if they receive an unsolicited request for the two-factor code. So these type of advanced attacks, as we're advancing our controls, cyber criminals will start leveraging attacks that either bypass or target those controls.
And if you think about everything that we've talked about, and then what's been exposed the last couple of weeks here, at least in the States, with the breach of some telcos, specifically getting some sensitive information, any activity with technology that has a repeatable behavior, you can likely identify, whom that individual might be based on that behavior. So it's kind of the next level of mapping data. And so when we talk about devices at homes, whether it's LED lights that you can control, for the holidays, for Christmas and New Year's and all that on your phone, or your stove. I have no idea why my stove has Wi-Fi on it, but just because you can enable something with Wi-Fi doesn't mean you should. But it's a different avenue, not only one to potentially get access to information about you as an individual to leverage against you at work, but it's just a broader, kind of bringing it back to the supply chain in the beginning. It just talks about from a broader sense of vendor security or supply chain security, where, at work, we don't have any LED lights that are programmable, well, at least as far as I know. Hopefully we don't. But hey, maybe at somebody's home, they have something like that could breach their home network and either get sensitive information about them, or then potentially be a foothold to start monitoring their home office network where they're working remote from. And it's just a different avenue going after accounts and systems that you're related to as a company. So again, it's just highlighting a very complex web of dependencies and potential vulnerabilities based upon all the technology that's out there.
I actually saw a researcher took an air gap network, and what they were able to do is essentially use some light that was on that computer and tricked it into sending a code that they then picked up from a security camera that was across the campus, but could see that little light blinking, and they were able to, at a very slow bit rate, mind you, but they were able to exfil data from that network. But I will say one thing about hybrid attacks. I mean, we're seeing a lot of those, click the QR code, get you off of your corporate network and onto your phone where you don't have the same protections. I'll give you like the nightmare example. So there's been a recent rash of robberies in high profile neighborhoods where they've actually come and the gangs have actually set up little cameras to watch a house for a week or so, and that they plan to target. So now they know the comings and goings. Well, the next logical, evolution of that is just happen to the security camera that's already there. And now I just know mom, dad, and both kids have left for the day. The maid doesn't show up until, 3 p.m. We got a nice window. We can go in and rob the place. So I think we're going to start to see that crossover between the cyber world and the real world.
Yeah, I was just thinking as Chris started talking about how many pieces of firmware are in my house. IoT, appliances, laptops, phones,
Yep.
gaming consoles, all the things that you need to keep up to date for security controls. But as you're talking, you'll see it in the intelligence reports once in a while where, we think this actor is in such and such region because we kind of got a pattern on their life. Your fridge knows what you eat, and your oven knows when dinner time is, and the temp's going up and down in your thermostat, and the lights are going on and off, and the TV knows when you're watching and when you're not. Somebody gets access to that data, they could easily put that pattern around any one of us. And then, like you said, be able to kind of understand when they want to target you based upon what they expect that you'll probably be doing at that time. And it can get pretty crazy pretty fast.
And that's not
AI is, and AI is going to make it easier to put all that together, right?
Even before AI, I hate not bashing on Target. They was about 6 years ago, maybe 6 to 9 years ago, in privacy circles, it was made aware that this family received a Target flyer brochure with coupons and all this stuff. And the young daughter in the home, Target was aware that she was pregnant before the family did, based upon the buying patterns that was happening. And that was before AI even became a thing to talk about. And it was just shocking of quote unquote big data and what it can do. But then you enable that further, extend it further with AI type technologies. It's almost endless possibilities. So again, bringing it back to like what was once considered novel is no longer novel. It should be expected, but to know what to expect is that's going to be pretty hard to figure out.
Well, these have been great conversations so far, and we have been tracking some questions while we're having our conversations here. We wanted to make sure that we left some ample time for that. So I think we're going to move on and take some of the questions that we've received in. And the first one I've got was, we had mentioned a couple of the hybrid phishing schemes, voice phishing, that we'd seen in the past. And, how do we think these are going to evolve in 2025 and beyond? And that's probably a good one for you to kick us off with, John.
Yeah, sure. So the ones we've seen in the past, the primary lure has been usually either McAfee, Norton, or Geek Squad have been like sort of the top ones. The way the scam works, you get an email that says we've charged you XYZ for the subscription. If you do wish to cancel, you've got 3 days to cancel, call this number. What that did is it got people away from, just doing everything on the computer. The other challenge here, or for the attacker, was so many of the telco providers would recognize a spam number, and so when that inbound call was coming for a tech support scam, they would just basically tell you that it was a scam or spam, and people wouldn't answer the phone. Well, you don't get any warning on the outbound. So by sending the email and having you initiate the call, they've just circumvented that. Where I see this going in the future is it's going to be far more targeted. You're going to see things like the grandparent scam, where they reach out and they claim that they're the, XYZ police department, in Cancun or whatever. And yeah, we've arrested little Johnny because, he was out drunk. He begged us to call his grandparents and not his parents. And of course, grandparents don't necessarily know what little Johnny sounds like. Well, now they can make it sound exactly like little Johnny when little Johnny gets on the phone, because, all they got to do is grab, a couple of TikTok or Snapchat or, whatever posts, take the voice, clone the voice, and now, they could literally go straight after the parents. So I think what we're going to see is, the continued hybrid attacks, but I think they're going to be hyper personalized. They're no longer going to be these just sort of, generic blast out 10,000 and, hope a few hundred people call. It's going to be a lot more targeted.
I feel like it wasn't a coincidence that the names you mentioned are all home cybersecurity vendors for people, essentially.
Exactly. We may start to see a lot more of that in the corporate world as well. And I fully expect to see that.
Yeah, Bob, I wanted to add on that. Through simulations we've conducted, we've seen that a significant number of individuals will disclose their password to someone that pretends to be their their organization's IT department. If the voice is convincing, if the message is convincing, people still fall victim to this type of attack and disclose their password to an unknown caller.
Chris, is there good training for that? That sounds like a problem that we have solutions. I mean, not like selling solutions, like teaching our employees what to look out for.
The best approach for training for that is not one-on-one training, but not the programmatic training. Going and visiting departments, having 2 slides and talk them through scenarios and really have their attention is the most effective way for somebody to really understand what's being displayed maybe during your annual security awareness training. That's helpful to reinforce. Until you can make it applicable, personable to them, it's not going to land. It's not going to, and so having that conversation, using specific examples where I can use specific examples with our HR team, our finance team, our strategy team that's specific to them, that's going to sink more in and hopefully be retained longer, in addition to or being supported by the annual security training.
It's kind of like that disclaimer we get in the outside. The IRS will never ask you for your bank account number. Our internal IT department will never ask you for your password kind of message.
Yep.
So we had another question. This one might be a good one for you, Theo. So data breaches aren't new, of course. And the question is, why do we think these breaches are going to play a bigger role in targeting humans in the future?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, this data will be utilized to create specific attacks, targeted attacks, through information that has been disclosed through breaches or through information we voluntarily disclose on social networking and social media sites. The combination of all this data could be used to create targeted attacks, right? So when we receive a call and this person has so much information about us, knows so much about us, the message is relevant to us, we'll act through intuition, right? And we'll react much quicker. So that's why it's very important to be careful what we disclose online and be aware of what already has been compromised and be conscious of those situations.
Do you see much with the nag factor, Theo, where they just pound you and pound you and pound you until somebody gets tired of it and they just hit the yes button, even though they know they shouldn't, to make the messages stop?
And that's the beauty of automation and email, right? The cyber criminals don't have to manually send out these messages or make those calls. They use tools to nag us, to annoy us, to keep sending those messages. And all it takes is for us to catch us at a moment of inattention, right? We're distracted by doing something else. We're responding to email while on conference call, and we didn't take the time to analyze, right? So by the continuous bombardment, they're hoping to find one opportunity where they'll get through.
It's MFA prompt fatigue right there.
Yes.
You bet. Chris, this would be a good one for you, I think, to kick us off. How can companies protect themselves against supply chain attacks?
Well, there's a couple different angles from that one. I would say first, as being the, prime in a relationship, engaging with other companies, and honestly, taking a wholly different approach to, supply chain security, vendor risk security. Again, move away from check the box, but really, who are your critical suppliers? Who are your critical vendors? What are your redundancy plans for them? How do you actually monitor security for them? If you have some continuous monitoring or ongoing monitoring, what can you do to protect yourself in the event that that particular service provider may be breached or becomes compromised in one way or another? Would you even know it? Do you have monitoring and what other APIs, whatever is being done between your company and theirs? So there's a different way to look at vendor security, supply chain security. Now being a part of the supply chain, I think you have to look at who are your customers, what are the likely attack paths, and think about it that way, which is going to be a different threat model than it's going to be otherwise for you, for somebody, let's say, generically on the internet that might be coming after you. But if someone's trying to get to some of your customer base, how might that happen based upon whatever you're supplying to the market? And start thinking about it that way in order to protect yourself or your product or whatever else you might be making for other people in the supply chain. The third piece, the way I'd look at it, is if you go down or if one of your vendors go down, like what happens? So really ultimately that impact piece, which might help inform where to focus your efforts at. And that's going to get hard. And if it's not already hard as it is, it's going to just keep getting harder and harder. And that's where my comment was earlier about really needing a different approach, different teaming almost around that supply chain vendor risk, and that looking at it truly as its own ecosystem that you have to protect and monitor. And it doesn't come in a spreadsheet. And how are you going to go about doing that? And it's going to be different for every company out there. But I think that's the best way to start thinking about it, is honestly throw away the old playbook and start thinking about what makes more sense.
Great information. Thank you. Well, we have reached kind of the end of our allotted time here. So I'd really like to thank everybody who has attended. We're hoping that you come back and see us again for additional future webinars. We love having these discussions with everybody. And thank you again to the panel. I know it's always time out of your day to come and do these things. I think everybody enjoyed it. I know that I did. And we're hoping that we will see you all again at another Fortra event soon. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.